Before we do that, though, a little bit about me. I've been in the Navy, excuse me, I've been in the Navy for 14 years and 7 months. So 15 years in April, actually, yeah. So in April of 2007, I went into boot camp at the very young, tender age of 33. I went in I joined kind of late, so do the math. I've been in almost 15 years. I joined in my early 30s. I'm a first class petty officer. I'm ancient. I'm sure I'm the oldest guy here in this classroom right now. But initially it wasn't I didn't plan on making a career out of it, but these things just sort of happened. So anyway, this is also my second training command. I've been an instructor before. I was an ATT instructor, Apprentice Technical Training Instructor at Great Lakes, TSC side, from 2013 to 2016. For those of you who haven't been through GM1, you may have been through that, right? Some other ratings like the electronics ratings and the electrical ratings, they go through that. So I taught basic DC circuits, I taught advanced AC circuits, I taught analog circuits, digital circuits, Ohm's law, Kirchhoff's law, that's what I taught. I got my MTS there too, so when I came to this command, I didn't have to worry about requalifying for MTS. So I have some experience in instructing. I served on carriers my whole career. My first ship was the USS George H.W. Bush. I was a plank owner on that ship. So I'm there from 08 to 2013. And I got to do the maiden deployment with them, which was a lot of fun. We hit a lot of ports in the Mediterranean and also the Middle East. It was really cool. My last ship was the USS George Washington. I don't know if you all know about the USS George Washington, but I got there in 2017, 2018, and went into something called RCOH. For those of you who don't know what that means, it's refueling and complex overhaul. So that means it's midlife overhaul. So it was in dry dock for 4 years. So basically, starting off, it was short duty with CPAY, which I thought was pretty cool in the beginning. But after a while, I joined the Navy because I wanted to travel. After a while, I got bored in the shipyard, really bored in the shipyard. Who here is familiar with Newport News Shipyard? Some of you, okay. So you know it's a very depressing place. Really depressing, very dirty, disgusting. Also that area is a little questionable too, so you have to be careful when you're walking to the parking lot at night. I was there. So it's almost like I did 3 short tours, back to back, if you think about it. But as I said, I came here in February of this year. Before this, I was an East Coast sailor my whole career. So this is my first time on the West Coast, my first time in San Diego. I've been to Cali many times. My sister lives up in San Francisco. And I've visited Northern Cali many times. I've been to LA once, but I had never actually been to San Diego until I PCS'd out here in Virginia back in February. When I left Virginia, it was very cold, 25 degrees, with 4 inches of snow on the ground. I get here a week later, same time of year, it's sunny and it's 70 degrees outside. Thought to myself, I can get used to this place. I like the West Coast, it's pretty cool. So I like it out here so far. I'm a pretty big fan. That's my story. I got a question for you all. Since we're covering a topic called communicating effectively, by a show of hands, who here can say that they've experienced issues with communication or miscommunication in their Navy career? I expect to see all of you raising your hands. It's a very commonplace in the Navy. Sometimes when messages are sent down or up the chain of command, oftentimes what was communicated can be distorted in many ways, all right? So that's an example. So as I said, I'm a former ATT instructor. I had to ensure that I was communicating everything, all the content, 100% correctly to my students when I was doing that instructing. So I have some experience with it. All right, so this lesson, the overall classification of this lesson is unclassified. You can take notes in your training guide, and also there are blanks in your training guide for you to take notes as well. All right? These are the references that we use for this lesson. I'm not going to read all of them, but later on when you get your training accounts, if you're interested in finding out what those references are, you will have access to them. The objectives for this course. We have the terminal objective at the top and the enabling objective at the very bottom. I'm going to read the enabling objective verbatim Given approved courseware and an appropriate learning environment with students, communicate effectively in accordance with the Encyclopedia of Management, Building a Team, the practical guide to mastering management. In a nutshell, you will maximize gaining attention from your future students through effective communication. My overview of this course. As an AV instructor, you must be able to communicate your knowledge, skills, and experiences to students in order to facilitate the learning process. Communicating is more than speaking. It involves your entire presence. How you present yourself has a great deal of impact on your students' interest and desire to learn. The lesson will discuss the elements of effectively communicating in the classroom. This topic is very relevant because you will need to effectively communicate to your future students if you want them to succeed. My classroom norms are quite simple. You're allowed to have your cell phone in here. I just ask that you keep it on silent. If you have to take a phone call or a text, I just ask that you quietly go out to the hallway, P-way, take the call and come back when you're done. Food and drink are allowed in my class. I just ask that if you have a drink, it's in a sealable container like this, to prevent spilling on the floor of your desk. With food, as I said, food's fine. I just ask that the food is not loud when you crunch into it, or also obnoxious. Case in point, I actually taught a class where this guy brought in a whole garlic chicken. Took it out, he started eating it, and he was sitting right here. Yeah, it wasn't that, it wasn't that pleasant. If I pose a question to you all you have to do, don't put out the answer, just raise your hand, and I will call upon you. If you need to use the head, you don't have to ask my permission, we're all adults here, just leave and come back quietly. If I'm moving too fast throughout the slides when I'm teaching, all you gotta do is raise your hand, let me know, and I will slow down or backtrack through the slides if necessary. This class will be taught by the sound of my voice, your participation, and the presence of audiovisual gear here in the classroom to include smartboard, right? Safety is paramount here in the Navy instructor training course. If you feel the environment has become unsafe, all you gotta do is throw up this symbol right here for training timeout, and just call out training timeout. We will cease all training, we will assess the situation, and we will go from there. In case of a fire, we will exit out these doors right here. We will exit the classroom, we will go down the unaffected stairwells, and we will meet up in the parking lot with our fearless class leader, BU2 McQuarrie. He will take attendance in the parking lot for accountability purposes. In event of an earthquake, since this is Southern California, we will seek shelter underneath our desks to protect ourselves from possible falling debris. In case of an active shooter, we're going to kill the lights, we're going to barricade the doors, we're going to shelter in place until we get an all clear from the command duty officer. Should the active shooter breach the space, we will fight the active shooter and we will win, because that's what we do. We are? Yeah. Now you might be asking yourself, what's in it for me? What am I going to get out of this lesson? All right, upon completion of this course, you will learn new techniques to maximize your communication, and you will gain satisfaction in applying that at your next command to your students. In addition to that, you'll be one step closer to your 805 Alpha NEC, also known as your Navy Instructor NEC. And upon completion of this course in its entirety, you will earn 9 college credits towards the degree. All right, are there any questions over my introduction? Outstanding. If there are no questions, I have a question for you all. How do you define communication? And that is HM2.
Communication is both verbal and the way you present yourself. Your body language says a lot about what you're trying to portray to the class or to the audience.
Great answer. Yes, it is verbal, but it is also non-verbal as well. I'm glad you brought that up. We'll go into that more later on. Does anyone else have their own definition of communication? Or is HM2 pretty much covered it? We'll say he's covered it. So the Navy, and I think Webster's Dictionary, defines communication the exchange of thoughts, opinions, and information through speech, writing, nonverbal cues, signs, and images. All right, so there are 5 elements involved in sending a message through communication. I'd like to explore those. I'd like to explore those 5 elements. Are there any questions over this slide? I'll give you a few more seconds to write that all in there. I know there's a blank right there in your training guide. Everyone good to go? Anyone need more time? You do? No problem. All right. Good to go? All right. Any questions over this slide? No one? Okay, so I'm going to talk about the 5 elements, or the 5-step process, the model for effective communication. We've got the sender, and that leads to the message or the medium. And then the delivery vehicle, how the message is going to be delivered, and the receiver, which will be your student. And then feedback, that's given in the form of verbal or nonverbal cues. All right, let's explore these. So we got the sender. So the sender, in this case us, the instructors, we first formulate the message they intend to communicate in their mind, or in a lesson plan, like what I'm using here. Second, they consider possible barriers that may affect the message. Third, they encode the message by putting the message into words they want to use. And then lastly, they clearly communicate or transmit the message. When talking about that second bullet right there, basically considering possible barriers, what kind of barriers do you think a sender may have? Someone giving instruction, what kind of barriers do you think they might have? I see Chief Rowley.
Something like a physical barrier, whether it be potentially a wall, in a cubicle, trying to relay your message over other noise that's in and around, whether it be a classroom or wherever you're instructing or you're trying to communicate.
Great example. Do you think any type of barrier, such as a wall, he said, that can actually silence the sender, perhaps? But also I have another question. What do you think, what kind of barrier do you think the sender, him or herself, may have when trying to communicate? And I see LT in the back.
Confidence?
Great example, confidence, yes. I think what you mean by that, sir, is maybe a lack of confidence could be a distraction, is that right?
Unconfidence as in like, they're very timid and don't know how to communicate, they constantly stutter.
Or they're not
fidget,
projecting their voice.
Projecting their voice.
Great example, sir, thank you very much. I see a number of people raising their hands. Okay, I saw HM1 Davenport.
Just a language barrier.
Great example. Language barrier, maybe even accents. Some person might speak English really well, I mean, speak it fluently, perfectly, but if they're from a country of origin that has a very thick accent, that can actually be a barrier to communication. What do you think now could be a barrier to communication? I think I saw Lieutenant Chung signaling to it.
Your mask.
Great example, sir. Yes, mask. Sometimes these can actually be a barrier. I make sure when I wear my mask, it's a thinner, it has like maybe only 1 or 2 layers. Because I have one mask that are like 4 layers, I would say. And sometimes they will multiple what I'm trying to communicate. If that makes any sense. So that's another example. Now let's talk about the message. So the message is whatever information you want to convey. The message may be verbal or nonverbal? Got a question for you all. What are some examples of good nonverbal communication?
Hand gestures.
Just please raise your hand.
Oh, sorry.
Yes,
Hand gestures. Like good hand gestures when you're.
Beautiful answer. Yes, hand gestures. Thumbs up, thumbs down. I could give a couple others. I probably shouldn't. I won't do that. But yes, any type of nonverbal cues that doesn't involve you vocalizing feedback. But it can also be something along the lines of, let's say, you're up in front of a class, teaching a class, and you do a comm check. Does everyone understand? If people give you a feedback, a nonverbal cue such as, yes, I understand. But you may want to look out for people, for students who either roll their eyes or shrug their shoulders. You see that happening, you may want to clarify. Let's talk about the delivery vehicle, or how you are going, the method you wish to deliver the message. So, the method chosen to deliver the message. Delivery vehicles include spoken or written words, pictures or other visual aids, computer-based lessons, videos, motion graphics, animation, and recorded audio. In this case, my delivery vehicle here is the smartboard, and also my electronic classroom devices as well. And then we talk about the receiver. The receiver will be your student. So there are 4 elements to the receiver. And that is the students or receivers will first hear and see the message you sent. The message is then affected by external barriers, such as noise or distractions and the student's own internal barriers. What I mean by internal barriers is something that might be going on in their personal life that may be preoccupying them, which could be a barrier to their learning. Possible internal barriers may include the student's experience level as well, and their understanding of terms that are used throughout the lesson. Your students then decode the message using mental images and thoughts. And then finally, the students then interpret the message. Just remember, interpretations will vary. Clearly, at this point in the process, there is no way for you to determine if students received the message you intended. To determine this, you must get feedback. So this is considered the most important element of the communication loop. As I said, this could be verbal or nonverbal. An example of verbal would be, I understand. Thank you. A nonverbal cue may be the shrug of a shoulder or an agreeable nod. And then, feedback provides essential information to the sender about your success in communicating the message. And then feedback is a critical tool for validating if the message was received. All right, are there any questions over the 5 steps in the model of effective communication? All right, if there are no questions, I'm going to go into the next slide. So we have the importance of effective communications regarding purpose, functions, and benefits. Let's look at purpose really quickly. So the purpose of effective communication in a training environment is to ensure students correctly understand the material presented by the instructor. So basically in my introduction, I stated the title and overview as to why this lesson is important or relevance. You need to establish that in your introduction before you actually teach a topic. And then let's talk about functions. For the receiver, 2 functions are performed. Receivers interpret and understand intended message from senders, and the receivers provide feedback to confirm correct message was received. I'll give you a couple seconds on this one because I know there's a long fill in the blank on page 63. All right, now let's talk about the benefits. Effective communication. So the benefits, it ensures accurate exchange of information. It also creates a safe and healthy environment, which is important if you're an instructor of high-risk training. And then help identify and remove barriers. As instructors, that can be done prior to teaching, making sure the training environment has no barriers, such as maybe loud noise, for example, or a flickering light. That can be very much a distraction to people. All right, are there any questions over this slide? Does anyone need more time on this slide? All right.
1 second.
Oh, sure. Everyone good to go? All right. Let's talk about active listening. Active listening is easier than or sounds pretty easy, but it's actually a lot harder than one would think. So the way to improve your listening skills is to practice active listening. This is where you make a conscious effort. Focus on not only the words that another person is saying, but more importantly, try to understand the complete message being sent. It is a two-step process. Let's talk about the focusing part of it. Actually, that dripping water could be a barrier to training. I gotta put in a trouble call for that. All right, so with focusing, you want to concentrate on the speaker by looking at them directly without staring. While listening, pay attention to body language and nonverbal cues. As I said before, such as eye rolls, or maybe they're shrugging their shoulders. Just any kind of cue to confirm that they either received the message or they didn't receive the message. But also, you got to do the same thing as the listener as well. Wait until speaker has finished before you think about your response. Basically, that simply put, that just means don't cut the speaker off, let them complete their entire message. Sometimes people think that when somebody is speaking to them, like 1/2 to 2/3 of the way into it, you automatically know what they're saying. That's not always the case. So just let them finish their story. And then encourage the speaker to speak. Allow them to continue with small verbal comments like yes and okay. Then we got understanding. Provide clear feedback by performing the following functions. Always acknowledge valid points. Rephrasing key points to ensure understanding. And then asking questions if the message is unclear. Give me a few more seconds on this slide. All right, are there any questions over the two-step process of active listening? All right, so we're gonna skip the active listening activity. We got some bad feedback on that from the past, so we don't want that activity anymore. But now I'd like to talk about something very important. And this will help you when you give your presentations throughout this course, for your demonstration, for your facilitation presentation, and then finally your capstone or your final presentation. So did Chief Scatliff in the introduction talk to you all about something called glossophobia?
Yes.
All right. So basically glossophobia, simply put, is just the fear of public speaking or the fear of speaking in front of a large audience. I think it was emphasized in the last lesson that we all have glossophobia to a degree. But some of us can control it, while other people are just downright terrified to get up in front of an audience and speak to them. But also other factors come into play, like how many people are in the room. I'm very comfortable talking to a classroom of 24 people, that's not a problem. But if this was a class of 100 people, on the first day, I might be shaking a little bit. I'm only human. I'm humble enough to admit that as I'm talking to you right now, I have a little bit of glossophobia. It's the first day, I'm getting to know you all. Same way you're getting to know me, right? But I can control it because I've been doing this for a while now. Even before I came to this command, I was an instructor my first short tour. And you will notice when you practice, you might be really, really scared the first time you get up there. But simply put, the more you practice, the more comfortable you will get addressing a group, all right? But just remember these 5 steps to controlling nervousness prior to training. So basically, be positive. Don't be too negative. Simply put, your audience wants you to succeed as much for their benefit as for yours. The more energized and confident you are as an instructor, the more engaged, receptive, and supportive your students will be. Be receiver-oriented. Be willing to actively listen, as we were talking about in the previous slides. Be willing to listen. Give the speaker their undivided attention, your students. Be prepared. Practice, practice, practice. Read, study, and write your personalization. We'll talk about that later, personalizing your lesson plans. Be organized. Have your lesson plan prepared and your activity items ready. Make sure your student support material is available. Make sure your students have their training guides. Make sure they have all the resources that they need. And then rehearse. I think this one's the most important one. It kind of goes back to practice, practice, practice. Use the materials, visual aids, and equipment in your lesson to ensure a smooth training session. So basically, you can practice at home in front of your significant other. You can practice at home by yourself in front of the mirror. You can practice at home in front of your dog if you want. I don't know if a dog will give you effective feedback, but just a thought, something to consider. But no, you can also record yourself as well. Here at the Navy Instructor Training Course, we don't record you all, but you can, when you're doing your presentations and also doing your practice presentations here, you can have somebody, one of your other classmates, record you on their phone, just to see how your gestures are, how your voice is, and how you present a message. We'll talk about Vegas skills in a minute. But those are the 5 steps to harnessing nervousness. Are there any questions over this slide? All right, if there are no questions, let's go into managing nervousness. So the trick is not to overcome nervousness, but instead to manage it. As I said, we all have varying degrees of glossophobia. We really can't get rid of it. We can just control it. So move naturally around the room. Prevent poor eye contact by preparing thoroughly. I try to equally distribute my eye contact to all of you when I instruct. Slow your speech to control excessive pause words. Question, what do you think I mean by pause word? I see HM1 Davenport. Exactly. Filler words, basically. You know, so when you were giving your presentations, we were actually, not your presentations, but when you were introducing each other, ABH1 was in the back documenting how many times people use filler words, how many times people, how do I put this, distracting gestures, such as putting their hands together, and a number of other things. We'll go over those shortly. Do not apologize and acknowledge your nervousness. All right, just simply move on. Control dry mouth by drinking water. I always have water up here when I'm instructing. The more you talk, the more your mouth gets dry. And the more you are prone to, let's say, lip smacking. Control distracting gestures by placing your hands behind you. However, don't have your hands behind you if you feel the need to do it for extended periods of time, because believe it or not, that can be a distraction as well. All right, are there any questions over managing nervousness? Great, let's go into types of verbal communications. Whether they be formal, informal, put into context, jargon, and or acronyms. So formal, used in official speech, documents, books, manuals. Friend, my friend and I went out to see. But it could also be your rank, your rate, or your last name. Informal. So basically, used among colleagues and friends in a relaxed atmosphere. First names, nicknames. Dude, buddy, pal, homie. Then we have context. So context, a brother, we are a band of brothers, so what that means obviously, plus what that means is, you might not literally be that person's brother, but if you think about it, we're the US Navy, we all come from different walks of life, we're from different backgrounds, different races, different ethnicities, different geographic locations, different economic backgrounds, different political persuasions, different needs and all that. But we all serve in the US Navy, so we have that one thing in common. Contextually speaking, you could say we're a band of brothers or siblings, if that makes any sense. In jargon, I'm heading out to the track with my wingman. It's funny, wingman means something completely different to me than how it's used here, but all right. And then of course we have acronyms. BFF. I'm looking for a BFF, best friend, whatever. I am it. For example, the 5 steps of ORM. For those of you who know. Are there any questions over this slide? Let's talk about additional verbal communication skills. So, use language geared to the group's level of education. What they mean by that is, it is important to use good grammar and good use vocabulary, but try to keep it simple. You want everyone to understand what you're saying. If you have to basically dumb down what you're saying, that's quite all right. Don't use biased language. Avoid gender and generational biased language. We don't want you to say you guys when you are teaching. We'd rather say you all. All right? Base examples on the new job or skill. Verbally acknowledge student answers or provide feedbacks. I don't know if you've noticed this so far, and we'll go into it in the next lesson when we talk about questioning techniques. But every time I ask a question and you give me your answer, I validate your answer with something called a cookie. Great answer, outstanding, beautiful, fantastic. We'll go more into that later. Avoid profanity or other offensive language. This is an automatic failure in an instructor evaluation and immediate removal from the podium. So don't use profanity while you're actually giving your presentation. I know we're sailors and Marines, that's hard to do, but we can do it. Any questions on this slide? All right, let's talk about nonverbal messages. So basically, nonverbal messages, they help interpret verbal messages, and they can be complete messages on their own. They can express emotions or attitudes. So we have experience serves as a guide to choosing communication level and styles. We have something called attitude. Your attitude affects how the message is presented and received. Abilities. Abilities of the sender and receiver can determine how messages are delivered. Perception, sorry about that. Perception allows receivers to gain knowledge through many different senses. Accuracy of the information affects the message. And of course, we have body language. Excuse me. Such as facial expression, stance, arm gestures can change the meaning of a message. Are there any questions over this slide? Yes.
You brought up facial expressions. An issue I can see with this is because we have masks on, when you're giving a lesson, do you have any examples of how we can overcome that obstacle? Because I have a naturally resting mean face, and it's not intentional, it's the thick eyebrows, they slant down. But when doing so, trying to portray a message with a mask on, how would you do it?
I don't know if y'all heard that in the back, but great question. So basically, he was asking me, H.M. was asking me, how do we look out for these type of cues when we have a mask on? It's hard to tell if somebody's actually smiling or if somebody's frowning. You're right, that can be a barrier, and I've noticed that as an instructor myself. The best way is just pay attention to anything else that's exposed other than the mask, other parts of the body, like their eyes, maybe the way, other gestures, such as hand gestures, arm gestures. That's what I would suggest. Or, if you're unclear, just simply ask. For example, if you want to know, if you're trying to detect a nonverbal cue to see if they understood what you said, but you can't get it, just ask them, did you understand what I just said? Does that make any sense?
Absolutely.
That's my suggestion. That's simple. Any other questions? Great question, by the way. Any other questions on this slide? All right, here's what I want to do now. I want to go into probably one of the most important parts of this course. It's called Vega. You might be asking yourself, what does Vega mean? So when you communicate any type of message or when you're instructing, you have to keep these 4 things into account. V for voice, eye contact, gestures, and attitude. You need to remember all of this when you are giving your presentations. Let's talk about voice first for Vega. So your delivery style will depend a lot upon your voice. So think of voice as starting off with articulation. It's simply understandable speech. You can achieve good articulation in 2 ways. Enunciate clearly. Use correct pronunciation in accordance with accepted standards. I like to project my voice so people in the back can hear me, for example. By projecting your voice, it doesn't mean you have to scream at the top of your lungs. Just speak loudly enough so people can understand. And then, grammar. Proper grammar is correct word usage when speaking or writing. Correct word usage results in quick and clear message delivery. When an error is made, it is difficult for the receiver to extract the precise meaning. We talked about this before. Yes, make sure you use good grammar, and also make sure you use good vocabulary as well. Just keep the vocabulary simple. Then we got rate of speech. You should neither talk at too slow a rate that puts your listeners to sleep, but you don't want to speak too quickly as well. You want everyone to understand it. Also, when you speak too quickly, you are more inclined to actually use filler words such as or so, you know. And then we got inflection. And then we got force. Forceful speech combines the power of the voice with the strength and conviction of the speaker. Proper force usage can convey conviction, give meaning, and add emphasis. Again, try to project your voice as much as you can. Any questions over the voice aspect of Vega? Let's talk about eye contact. It is the most influential nonverbal element. It is used to personalize instruction. It stimulates students to listen more intently. It enhances instructor credibility and allows observation of student nonverbal behavior. It's As I said, when I'm up here talking to you all, I try to share the love, so to speak, or make sure I'm equally distributing my eye contact to each of you individually when I'm talking to you. Benefit for you is that you know I'm actually paying attention to you. Benefit for me is I can look out for verbal cues and nonverbal cues. I'm sorry, I can look out for nonverbal cues is what I meant to say. Does anyone need more time on this for eye contact? Okay, a couple of you, sure. Anyone else need more time? All right. Let's talk about gestures. So gestures are natural movements that convey a thought or a speech. Gestures will add to the effectiveness of your speech if the gesture is natural. Use open hands. Smile, it's hard to do with your mask on. So basically, yeah, use open hands, smile, and maintain an unobstructed view between you and the students. If the gesture is artificial, posed, or strained, it distracts rather than reinforces. Inappropriate gestures include inappropriate use of hands, arms, body, and facial expressions. When you all have a minute, I would like you to turn to page 68. So on page 68, if you can see right there, these are basically inappropriate gestures. We don't want you to use them when you are instructing. The reason for that is these gestures can actually be distractions, believe it or not. So you have, if you all see in the top left-hand corner, something called the fidgeter, or what we call hand washing. When you instruct, we want you to keep your hands apart from each other, unless you're counting, for example. All right, we'll go more into that later. Even though I know it's almost instinctive when you're speaking in front of a publicly speaking, I should say, you want to put your hands together. It's almost like you want to do that. But we want you to keep your hands apart. Then there's the pacer. So mostly we want you to move around the classroom naturally, all right? But if it seems like you're going back and forth quickly and almost with the same timing, that can be a distraction to learning as well. And then of course, over-gesturing, over-gesticulating. I don't see a lot of people doing this, but I guess it's happened before. Do not fold your arms when you're up here giving your presentation. Immobile. So with immobile, we don't mind if you're comfortable behind the podium. We just want you to come out sometimes, especially if you're asking a question. That's what I do. I'm very, very comfortable being behind the podium. But oftentimes when I want to pose a question to you all, if you notice, I come out and simply pose the question to you all. And then when I'm done responding and then validating your answers, I go back to the podium. That's just me. There's over-relaxed. The one right next to that, do you see where it says two-fisted? I have never seen that before. How nervous does somebody have to be if they're like this, giving a presentation? Never seen that before, so we don't have to worry about it. And then you have somebody who sways too much. It's okay if you do it occasionally, but if we see people constantly giving presentations doing this, that can be a distraction as well. And those are just some of the gestures we were talking about. So go back to page 65. Let's talk about the most important aspect. Most important trait of Vega. 4 indicators of good attitude. Sincerity. You're sincere in your good attitude. You're not feigning it. Well, you can sometimes. Confidence. Know that you're a subject matter expert, and and you are capable to teach. Enthusiasm. You don't have to be overly enthusiastic, but just be somewhat enthusiastic. At the very least, be pleasant with your students. And then humor. If you're a funny person, use that to your advantage. Sometimes I try using humor to my advantage. Clearly, I'm not that funny. And then keep a professional attitude at all times. Treat all of your students with respect. You will get respect back from them. All right, are there any questions over this slide? If there are no questions, I would like to show you all a video. Quick video about data.
Hello, I'm here to share with you the effective personal communication protocol.
You all hear that in the back?
Delivery style and behavior